The thunder of hooves pounded across the dusty plains as Vivian Granger pushed his exhausted stallion to its limits. The auction notice crumpled in his pocket, burning like a hot coal against his skin. The words scrawled in bold ink had stopped his heart cold when he'd spotted them in Cottonwood Springs earlier that morning. Slave auction Negro woman and child sold as set May 18, 1871. Tomorrow. They were planning to sell a mother and her daughter tomorrow, right under the noses of decent folk. 13 years after the Emancipation Proclamation had supposedly ended such barbarity. Spring of 1871 had brought unexpected prosperity to the Colorado Territory. The small mining town of Cottonwood Springs was booming, attracting all manner of folks, some honest, many not. Vivian had been working his small ranch about 10 miles outside town for nearly 3 years. At 32, he was neither young nor old by frontier standards, but the harsh land had weathered his face to look older, his dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. He'd come west after the war, wanting nothing more than peace and solitude after 4 years of blood and chaos with the Union Army. As he approached town, Vivian slowed his horse, patting the animal's sweat-slicked neck. "Easy, Thunder, we'll get you some water soon." The main street was already bustling despite the early hour. Miners, cowboys, and merchants moved with purpose between the various establishments that made up the heart of Cottonwood Springs. Sheriff Mills was leaning against the post outside his office, thumbs hooked in his belt. "Morning, Granger," he called as Vivian dismounted. "What brings you into town so early?" Vivian pulled the crumpled paper from his pocket. How can this be happening, Mills? Slavery's been illegal for years." The sheriff's weathered face darkened. "Jed Morgan and his boys brought them in last night. Claims they're indentured servants he purchased legal like in Missouri. Says he's got papers. That's horse manure and you know it. Maybe so, but Morgan's got half the town council in his pocket since he bought that silver mine." Mills lowered his voice. "Between you and me, I don't like it either, but my hands are tied unless someone can prove those papers are forgeries." Vivian's jaw clenched. "Where are they keeping them?" "Old storage shed behind the saloon." Mills studied Vivian's face. "Don't go doing anything foolish, Granger. Morgan's men are trigger-happy, especially that new fella Carson. I'm just going to have a look." Vivian tied Thunder to the hitching post. "Mind if I leave him here while I take care of a few things?" The sheriff nodded, his expression making it clear he knew Vivian wasn't being entirely forthright. But Mills was a good man at heart, even if he sometimes lacked the courage to stand against the town's more powerful residents. Vivian made his way toward the saloon, his mind racing. He had no real plan, just a burning certainty that he couldn't let this happen. Not here, not now, not when he'd fought and bled to end such injustice. The shed was easy enough to find. It was a ramshackle building, barely standing, with a padlock on the door and a bored-looking guard slouched in a chair outside. Vivian recognized him as one of Morgan's hired guns, a young hothead named Peters. "Morning," Vivian said casually, tipping his hat. Peters straightened, his hand moving instinctively toward his holstered pistol. "This area's off-limits, Granger. Just passing by." Vivian paused, noticing a small window on the side of the shed. Through it, he caught a glimpse of movement inside a woman's face, briefly illuminated by the slanting morning light. Her eyes, filled with a mixture of fear and defiance, met his for just an instant before she pulled back from view. That momentary connection was enough to cement Vivian's resolve. Those eyes belonged to a human being, not property to be bought and sold. And somewhere in there was a child, likely terrified out of her mind. "Mind your own business if you know what's good for you," Peters warned, clearly noting Vivian's interest in the window. Vivian nodded and continued walking, his mind now working furiously to formulate a plan. He needed help, and he knew just who to ask. The general store was already open, with Theodore Adams sweeping the wooden boardwalk outside. Adams had been a fellow Union soldier, and though they hadn't served in the same unit, they shared a bond forged in the common cause. "Theo," Vivian said quietly, approaching the storekeeper, "I need to talk to you." Adams looked up, recognizing the serious tone. "Come inside." Once the door was closed behind them, Vivian explained what he'd discovered. Adam's expression grew increasingly grim. "Morgan's been getting bolder since the new mayor took office," Adams said, shaking his head. "But this crosses a line." "I need to get them out before that auction tomorrow," Vivian said. "And I could use your help." Adams hesitated only briefly. "What do you need?" "A distraction. And a wagon if you can spare one. I'm thinking tonight after the saloon gets busy." "Morgan's men will come after you," Adams warned. "You know that, right?" Vivian nodded. "I've got my old cabin up in Blackwater Canyon. Nobody knows about it except you. We can hide there until I figure out next steps." "All right," Adams agreed. "I'll create a commotion around 9 tonight. Something big enough to draw that guard away from the shed. The wagon will be behind my store with supplies." "I owe you, Theo." "You don't owe me anything. Just be careful." The rest of the day crawled by with excruciating slowness. Vivian made a show of conducting business around town, purchasing supplies and exchanging pleasantries with townsfolk. He visited the blacksmith to have a loose shoe repaired on Thunder, and even spent a few minutes chatting with the banker about the weather, all the while acutely aware of the shed behind the saloon and its occupants. As evening fell, Vivian positioned himself in the alley across from the saloon, watching as the establishment gradually filled with miners and cowboys looking to blow off steam after a long day's work. Peters remained at his post, though he looked increasingly bored and envious of the revelry just yards away. At precisely 9 o'clock, a thunderous explosion rocked the night. Vivian saw flames leap into the sky from behind the livery stable. Adams had clearly gone all out with the distraction. Shouts of alarm filled the air as people poured out of the saloon and other buildings. "Fire!" someone yelled. "The livery's on fire," Peters hesitated, clearly torn between his duty and the emergency. When a second, smaller explosion sounded, he made his decision, abandoning his post to run toward the commotion. Vivian wasted no time. He sprinted across the street, pulled out the heavy iron spike he'd had the blacksmith make earlier, and smashed the padlock with 3 powerful blows. It broke with a satisfying crack. He pulled open the door and stepped into the dimly lit interior. The woman he'd glimpsed earlier was on her feet instantly, pushing a young girl of perhaps 7 or 8 years behind her protectively. "I'm here to help," Vivian said quickly, keeping his voice low. "My name's Vivian Granger. I have a wagon ready to get you out of here." The woman's eyes narrowed in suspicion. "Why would you help us?" "Because what they're doing is wrong," Vivian replied simply. "We don't have much time. Will you trust me?" She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded once. "I'm Tamara Caldwell. This is my daughter, Eliza." "Stay close to me," Vivian instructed, peering out to make sure the coast was clear. "We need to move fast." They slipped out of the shed and into the shadows of the alley. Vivian led them on a circuitous route to avoid the crowd that had gathered around the livery stable, where men were forming a bucket brigade to fight the fire. Adams had planned well. The fire was impressive enough to draw attention, but contained enough not to spread to the rest of the town. Behind the general store, as promised, was a wagon loaded with supplies and hitched to 2 sturdy mules. Vivian helped Tamara and Eliza climb into the back, then covered them with a tarp. "It's going to be uncomfortable, but we need to get clear of town before anyone realizes you're gone," he explained as he climbed onto the driver's seat. "Try to stay quiet." He set the mules at a steady pace, not too fast to attract attention but quick enough to put distance between them and Cottonwood Springs. They passed a few townsfolk still rushing toward the fire, but no one paid them much mind in the chaos. Once they were clear of town, Vivian urged the mules to a faster pace. The night was clear, with a bright 3/4 moon illuminating the trail. After they'd traveled about 4 miles, he pulled over by a small stream. "You can come out now," he said, pulling back the tarp. "We'll rest the mules for a few minutes." Tamara emerged first, helping Eliza out after her. In the moonlight, Vivian got his first clear look at them. Tamara was tall and slender, with high cheekbones and intelligent eyes that reflected the starlight. Despite the dirt and exhaustion evident on her face, she carried herself with dignity. Eliza was a miniature version of her mother, with the same determined set to her small jaw. "Where are you taking us?" Tamara asked, keeping a protective arm around Eliza's shoulders. I have a cabin up in the mountains. It's remote, no one will find us there while we figure out what to do next. Vivian handed her a canteen. Are you hungry? There's bread and jerky in that sack. Eliza's eyes lit up at the mention of food. Tamara nodded, reaching for the provisions. Thank you. As they ate, Vivian kept watch, alert for any signs of pursuit. How did you end up with Morgan? He asked quietly. Tamara's expression hardened. We were traveling west from St. Louis with a group of other freed people, planning to settle in California. Morgan and his men attacked our wagon train 3 days ago, killed 2 of the men traveling with us, and scattered the rest. They took us, saying we'd fetch a good price. Her voice broke slightly. I thought those days were over. They are supposed to be, Vivian said grimly. What Morgan's doing is illegal, no matter what papers he claims to have. The law hasn't always concerned itself with justice for people who look like us, Tamara replied, a lifetime of hard experience evident in her voice. I know, Vivian acknowledged. But I give you my word, I'll do everything in my power to keep you both safe. They continued their journey through the night, leaving the main trail and taking increasingly narrow paths as they climbed into the mountains. By dawn, they reached the small cabin nestled in a secluded valley with a clear view of the approaches. It's not much, Vivian apologized as he helped them down from the wagon. But it's solid, and there's a stream nearby with clean water. The cabin was indeed modest, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table and chairs, and a narrow bed in one corner. Vivian had built it as a hunting cabin when he first arrived in the territory, before establishing his ranch in the valley below. We'll manage, Tamara said, surveying the space. Eliza had finally succumbed to exhaustion, leaning heavily against her mother's side. You two take the bed, Vivian said. I'll sleep by the fire. We should be safe here, but I'll keep watch just in case. Once Eliza was settled and sleeping soundly, Tamara joined Vivian by the fireplace where he was brewing coffee. Why did you risk yourself for us? She asked directly, her voice barely above a whisper to avoid waking her daughter. You could have been killed or worse. Vivian was silent for a moment, watching the flames dance. I fought in the war, he finally said. Lost my brother at Gettysburg, took a bullet myself at Cold Harbor. He unconsciously rubbed his left shoulder where the scar tissue still pulled tight sometimes. When I saw that auction notice, I couldn't stand by and let everything we fought for be ignored. Tamara studied his profile in the firelight. There aren't many who would put themselves at risk for strangers. Maybe there should be more, he replied simply. In the days that followed, they settled into a cautious routine. Vivian would check the surrounding area each morning for signs of pursuit, then hunt or fish for their meals. Tamara proved remarkably resourceful, turning the simple cabin into something closer to a home. She found wild berries and edible plants to supplement their diet, and her clever fingers mended Vivian's worn clothing. Eliza was initially shy around Vivian, watching him with wary eyes. But children are naturally resilient, and by the 3rd day, she was following him around the cabin clearing, asking endless questions about the birds and animals they encountered. On the 5th day, Vivian returned from checking his snares to find Tamara sitting outside the cabin, a troubled expression on her face as she watched Eliza playing with a family of squirrels that had made their home in a nearby tree. What is it? He asked, setting down the rabbit he'd caught. We can't stay here forever, she said quietly. Morgan won't give up easily. Men like him see people as possessions and he'll want his property back. Vivian sat beside her on the rough-hewn bench. I've been thinking about that. There's a settlement about 60 miles north of here. Good people, many of them abolitionists who came west after the war. They might help get you safely to California. Tamara turned to face him. Is that what you think we should do? I think you should have choices, Vivian replied. Something Morgan tried to take from you. Their eyes held for a long moment. Vivian had been trying not to notice how his heart had begun to quicken whenever Tamara entered a room, how her laugh when Eliza said something amusing made something warm unfurl in his chest. It wasn't right, he told himself. She was vulnerable, dependent on him for safety. Any feelings he might be developing were inappropriate under the circumstances. And if we chose to stay, Tamara asked softly. Before Vivian could respond, Eliza's alarmed cry cut through the air. "Mama, riders coming." Vivian was on his feet instantly, grabbing the rifle he kept propped against the cabin wall. In the distance, he could see dust rising from the trail that led up to the valley. Too much dust for a single rider. "Inside, quickly," he ordered. "There's a small cellar under the floor, behind the bed. Hide there and don't come out unless I call for you." Tamara grabbed Eliza's hand. "What about you? I'll handle this." Vivian checked the rifle's load. "Go now." Once they were safely hidden, Vivian took up a position at the cabin's single window, his mind racing. It could be hunters, he told himself, or travelers who'd gotten lost. But in his gut, he knew better. The riders came into view, 5 of them, led by Jed Morgan himself, his distinctive white hat visible even at a distance. Beside him rode Carson, Morgan's most dangerous gunman. Vivian recognized Peters and 2 others whose names he didn't know bringing up the rear. They reined in about 50 yards from the cabin, clearly wary of an ambush. "Granger," Morgan's voice boomed across the clearing. "We know you're in there. Come out and bring my property with you, and maybe I won't hang you as a thief." Vivian's finger tensed on the rifle's trigger. He could pick off at least 2 of them before they reached the cabin. But that would mean blood on his hands, and with 5 of them, the odds weren't good that he'd survive the encounter. "They're not property, Morgan," he shouted back. "Slavery ended years ago, in case you missed the news." Morgan's laugh was ugly. "I've got papers that say different." "Now send them out, or we're coming in to get them." Vivian's mind raced. The cellar was well hidden, but if Morgan and his men searched thoroughly, they'd find it, and once they did, he made a quick decision. Grabbing his sidearm and stuffing extra ammunition into his pockets, he slipped out the back door of the cabin. Using the trees for cover, he circled around until he was behind the riders. Morgan was growing impatient. "Carson, Peters, check the cabin. Dawson, watch the trees in case he tries to run. Williams, with me." As Carson and Peters dismounted and approached the cabin, Vivian aimed carefully and fired a shot into the air. All 5 men instantly wheeled toward the sound, drawing their weapons. "That's far enough." Vivian called from his position behind a large boulder. "Next shot won't be a warning." "There he is," Dawson shouted, firing wildly in Vivian's direction. The shot went wide, splintering bark from a tree several feet to Vivian's left. "You're outnumbered, Granger," Morgan called. "Be reasonable." "I'll pay you for your trouble, $50 for returning what's mine." "They're not yours," Vivian replied, anger making his voice shake. "They're free people, same as you and me." "They're nothing like you and me," Morgan sneered. "Now I'm losing patience. Carson, burn him out." Carson pulled something from his saddlebag, a bottle with a rag stuffed in the neck. He struck a match, lit the rag, and hurled the makeshift firebomb toward the cabin. It crashed through the window, and within seconds, flames began licking at the dry wooden walls. "No." Vivian shouted, horror struck. Tamara and Eliza were still hidden in the cellar. If the cabin burned around them, he had no choice. Taking careful aim, he fired at Carson, catching the man in the shoulder. Carson screamed, clutching at the wound as he fell to one knee. The other men scattered, diving for cover. Vivian used the confusion to sprint toward the cabin, staying low and zigzagging to avoid the bullets that whined past him. He reached the back door just as the roof began to catch fire. "Tamara, Eliza." He shouted, dropping to his knees and yanking up the trapdoor that concealed the cellar. "Come quickly." The cabin's on fire. Terrified eyes stared up at him from the darkness. He reached down, helping first Eliza and then Tamara up into the smoke-filled cabin. "Out the back," he directed, coughing as the acrid smoke filled his lungs. "Stay low and run for the trees." They made it out of the burning cabin just as the roof began to collapse. Keeping Tamara and Eliza between himself and the thick foliage for protection, Vivian guided them toward the stream that ran behind the cabin. "Follow it upstream," he whispered urgently. "There's a cave about half a mile up, hidden behind a waterfall. Wait for me there." "What about you?" Tamara clutched his arm, her eyes wide with fear. "I'll lead them away, then circle back," Vivian promised. "Now go, quickly." Once they were safely moving upstream, Vivian deliberately broke cover, firing 2 shots toward Morgan and his men before dashing into the trees in the opposite direction. As he'd hoped, they took the bait, mounting their horses and giving chase. For the next hour, Vivian led them on a wild pursuit through the forest, doubling back, crossing streams to hide his tracks, and generally making himself an infuriating target. He managed to wing one more of Morgan's men Williams, he thought, before the man fell from his horse with a cry of pain. Eventually, with his ammunition running low and confident he'd led them far enough from the cave, Vivian slipped away under the cover of a rocky outcropping. He circled back toward the stream, moving carefully to avoid leaving obvious tracks. The cave behind the waterfall was well hidden, just as he'd told Tamara. He'd discovered it while hunting the previous winter and had sometimes used it as a shelter during storms. The narrow entrance opened into a surprisingly spacious cavern, dry and secure. "Tamara, Eliza," he called softly as he approached. "Here." Tamara's voice was thick with relief. She emerged from behind the curtain of water, pulling Vivian into a fierce embrace. "We thought you might be." "I'm all right," he assured her, returning the embrace before gently pulling back. "Are you both okay?" Eliza appeared beside her mother, her eyes huge in her small face. "The bad men burned our house." "It wasn't really our house," Vivian said gently, kneeling to her level. "And we can build another one, a better one." "Is it safe?" Tamara asked, keeping her voice low. "For now. I led them several miles away, but they'll probably circle back to check the cabin once they realize they've lost my trail." Vivian ran a hand through his hair, grimacing at the soot and sweat. "We need to move as soon as it gets dark." "Where will we go?" Tamara's voice was steady, but Vivian could see the exhaustion and worry in her eyes. "My ranch," he decided. "It's risky, but Morgan wouldn't expect us to go there. We can gather supplies and decide our next move." As night fell, they made their way carefully down the mountain, avoiding the trails and keeping to the densest parts of the forest. Eliza was exhausted, so Vivian carried her on his back for most of the journey. The child's small arms wrapped trustingly around his neck, her breathing eventually evening out into sleep despite the difficult terrain. "She likes you," Tamara observed softly as they paused to rest by a small stream. "She doesn't usually warm to people so quickly." "She's a remarkable child," Vivian replied, carefully shifting the sleeping girl into a more comfortable position. "Brave, like her mother." Tamara's eyes met his in the darkness. "Thank you, Vivian, for everything." The simple sincerity in her voice touched something deep within him. Before he could respond, a twig snapped somewhere behind them. Both froze, instantly alert. "Could be a deer," Vivian whispered, though his hand moved instinctively to the pistol at his hip. "Or it could be them," Tamara replied, equally quietly. They remained motionless, barely breathing, as they strained to hear any further sounds. After several tense minutes with no additional noises, they continued on their way, moving even more cautiously than before. Dawn was breaking by the time they reached Vivian's ranch. The modest homestead consisted of a small but sturdy house, a barn, and a corral where several horses grazed. Thunder lifted his head and nickered a greeting as they approached. "Looks peaceful," Vivian observed, surveying the area carefully before leading Tamara and the now awake Eliza toward the house. "But we'll stay alert. Morgan might think to check here." Inside, the house was simple but comfortable, with a large main room that served as both kitchen and living area and two small bedrooms. Vivian quickly lit a fire in the stone hearth while Tamara examined the pantry. "We have enough food for a few days," she reported. "What's the plan?" Vivian straightened from the fireplace, brushing ash from his hands. "We have options. We could try for that settlement I mentioned or head further west. California's still a possibility." "Or," Tamara asked, sensing there was something he wasn't saying. "Or we stay and fight," Vivian said quietly. "Morgan's breaking the law. With the right evidence, we could bring him down." "That's dangerous," Tamara warned, though there was a gleam of interest in her eyes. "Men like Morgan don't fall easily." "No, they don't," Vivian agreed. "But I know people in town who would stand with us if we had proof of what he's doing." Their discussion was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Vivian moved swiftly to the window, rifle in hand. "It's just one rider," he reported, relief evident in his voice as he recognized the visitor. "It's Theo Adams from the general store." Vivian went out to meet his friend, who dismounted with obvious concern on his face. "You're alive," Adams exclaimed. "Morgan's been telling everyone you kidnapped his servants and that he's offering a reward for your capture." "They're not his servants," Vivian replied grimly. "He attacked a group of free people traveling west and was planning to sell Tamara and her daughter illegally." Adams nodded. "I figured it was something like that. That's why I brought this." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a folder of papers. "Found these in Morgan's office when I was helping organize things after the fire. Thought they might be important." Vivian took the folder, opening it to find several documents inside. His eyes widened as he scanned them. "These are forged indentured servant contracts, and look here, correspondence with other men about capturing and selling free people. This is evidence of an entire operation." "Exactly," Adams said grimly. "Morgan's been doing this for years, it seems, grabbing freed people and selling them back into servitude, mostly in the territories where law enforcement is sparse." Vivian's jaw tightened. "This is enough to hang him." "If we can get it to the right authorities," Adams cautioned. "Morgan's got the local law in his pocket, but there's a federal marshal in Denver who's been looking for evidence against him for months." "Then that's where we need to go," Vivian decided. "Denver's 3 days' ride from here." Adams shook his head. "Morgan's got men watching the trails. You'd never make it." "Then we'll have to bring the marshal here," Vivian said, his mind racing. "Can you get a message to Denver?" "There's a telegraph in Silver Creek about a day's ride south," Adams replied. "I could go send a wire asking the marshal to come." "Do it," Vivian said. "In the meantime, we'll lay low here. Morgan doesn't know about these documents yet, does he?" "I don't think so. The fire created enough confusion that no one's likely noticed they're missing yet." After Adams departed for Silver Creek, Vivian explained the situation to Tamara, who had been listening from the doorway. "So now we wait," she said, considering. "How long do you think it will take the marshal to get here?" 4 days, maybe 5, Vivian estimated. "We'll need to stay alert." "Morgan's sure to check here eventually." The next few days passed in a strange blend of tension and domestic tranquility. Vivian and Tamara took turns keeping watch while establishing a routine that brought a semblance of normalcy for Eliza's sake. They tended the small vegetable garden behind the house, cared for the horses, and in the evenings, sat by the fire while Vivian read from one of the few books he owned. It was during these quiet moments that something shifted between them. Their conversations deepened, moving beyond immediate concerns to hopes, dreams, and the lives they'd lived before their paths crossed. Vivian spoke of his childhood in Pennsylvania, of losing his parents to typhoid when he was 16, of fighting alongside his brother in the war only to watch him fall at Gettysburg. Tamara shared her own story, born into slavery in Virginia, taught to read in secret by her mother, and finally tasting freedom when Union troops liberated the plantation where she'd spent her first 20 years. Eliza had been born free, a fact that made Tamara fiercely protective of her daughter's future. "I want her to grow up never knowing what it's like to be considered someone's property," she said one evening as they watched Eliza sleeping peacefully. "I want her to believe she can be anything, do anything." "She will," Vivian promised, "and you'll be there to see it." Their eyes met in the firelight, and this time neither looked away. The connection between them had been growing stronger each day, undeniable despite the danger that still threatened them. "Vivian," Tamara said softly, "when this is over, what happens then?" He reached across the small space between them, taking her hand in his. "Whatever you want to happen. If you still want to go to California, I'll make sure you get there safely. And if we wanted to stay," her voice was barely above a whisper, "then this place would be your home for as long as you wished," Vivian replied, his heart pounding in his chest. "I've grown rather fond of having you both here." Tamara's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I've grown rather fond of being here." The moment was interrupted by the distant sound of a rider approaching at speed. Vivian was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand as he moved to the window. "It's Adams," he reported with relief, setting the rifle aside and going to the door. The storekeeper dismounted quickly, his expression grim. "The marshal's on his way, but we've got trouble." Morgan and his men rode into Silver Creek while I was there. They're asking questions, offering rewards. It won't take them long to start checking isolated ranches. How many men does he have now? Vivian asked. At least a dozen, Adams replied. He's hired extra guns. Word is he's furious about those missing papers and suspects you took them. Vivian exchanged a look with Tamara. When will the marshal arrive? 2 days, maybe 3, Adams said. I'm not sure you have that long. Morgan seemed determined to find you quickly. Then we need to prepare, Vivian decided. Tamara, pack only what's essential. Theo, can you take Tamara and Eliza to your place in town? They'd be safer there than here. Tamara shook her head firmly. We're not leaving you to face them alone. It's too dangerous. It's been dangerous since the moment you broke that padlock, Tamara interrupted. We're in this together now. Adams cleared his throat. She's right, Vivian. Besides, I've already sent word to some of the other men in town who fought with us in the war. When Morgan makes his move, he'll find more resistance than he's expecting. The next morning, their preparations were interrupted by the distant sound of multiple horses approaching. Vivian, who had been reinforcing the shutters on the windows, froze. Get inside, he told Tamara, who was helping him. Take Eliza to the root cellar and stay there until I call for you. Vivian, please, he said urgently. I need to know you're both safe. She hesitated, then nodded, running toward the house where Eliza had been playing with a rag doll Tamara had made for her. Vivian positioned himself on the porch, rifle in hand, as Morgan and 7 other riders came into view. They stopped about 50 yards from the house, spreading out in a loose semicircle. Granger, Morgan called. I know you're harboring my property. Send them out now and we might let you live. They're not your property, Morgan, Vivian replied. And we have the documents to prove you've been kidnapping free people and selling them illegally. Morgan's face darkened with rage. You're a dead man, Granger. Boys, burn him out. Before any of them could move, rifle shots rang out from the tree line to the left of the house. 2 of Morgan's men fell from their horses, while the others scattered, seeking cover. What the Morgan began, wheeling his horse around to face this new threat. From the trees emerged Adams, accompanied by Sheriff Mills and 5 other men, all former Union soldiers who had settled in the area after the war. It's over, Morgan, Mills called. We've got you surrounded. Morgan's response was to draw his pistol and fire wildly toward Mills, missing by several feet. The sheriff's return shot was more accurate, catching Morgan in the arm and causing him to drop his weapon with a howl of pain. The remaining hired guns, seeing their employer wounded and outnumbered, quickly surrendered. Only Carson tried to make a break for it, spurring his horse toward the open field behind the ranch. Vivian took careful aim and fired, hitting the horse's flank. The animal stumbled, throwing Carson heavily to the ground where he lay motionless. In the aftermath, with Morgan and his men disarmed and under guard, Mills approached Vivian with a grim smile. Adams showed me those documents this morning, he said. Been wanting to take Morgan down for months, but needed the evidence. Federal marshal should be here tomorrow to take them all to Denver for trial. Thank you, Vivian said, clasping the sheriff's hand. I know it wasn't an easy position for you to be in. Mills shrugged. Sometimes a man has to decide which side of history he wants to stand on. I fought for the Union same as you did. About time I remembered what that meant. When the house was clear of danger, Vivian called for Tamara and Eliza to come out of hiding. They emerged cautiously, Tamara's arms protectively around her daughter's shoulders. It's over, Vivian told them, relief evident in his voice. Morgan and his men are under arrest. The marshal will be here tomorrow to take them to Denver for trial. Tamara's eyes filled with tears of relief. Truly over, truly, Vivian confirmed. You're free, both of you, free to go wherever you choose, do whatever you want. Eliza looked up at her mother. Can we stay here, Mama? I like it here. Mr. Vivian reads stories and there are horses and hush, Eliza, Tamara said gently, though her eyes never left Vivian's face. That depends on Mr. Vivian. I meant what I said before, Vivian told her, taking a step closer. This place is your home for as long as you want it to be. And if we wanted it to be forever? Tamara asked softly. Instead of answering with words, Vivian closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. Nothing would make me happier. The marshal arrived the following day, a tall, stern-faced man named Harrington, who reviewed the evidence with meticulous care before declaring it more than sufficient to prosecute Morgan and his accomplices for multiple violations of federal law. "You've done the country a service," he told Vivian as he prepared to depart with his prisoners. Morgan's operation extended well beyond Colorado territory. With his network exposed, we can put an end to similar operations across the West. In the weeks that followed, Vivian, Tamara, and Eliza settled into a new rhythm of life together. The small ranch began to flourish under their combined efforts. Tamara's skilled hands transformed the sparse interior of the house into a true home, while Eliza delighted in helping care for the animals and learning to ride on a gentle mare Vivian bought especially for her. Word of their story spread throughout the region, bringing unexpected consequences. Other freed people who had settled in the area began to visit, seeking Tamara's counsel and Vivian's protection. Gradually, a small community began to form around the ranch, with several families building homes on adjacent land that Vivian helped them purchase. On a golden autumn evening 6 months after Morgan's arrest, Vivian and Tamara stood together on the porch of their home, watching as Eliza played with the children of their new neighbors in the fading light. "I never imagined this," Tamara said, leaning against Vivian's side. "A home, a community, a future without fear." "Neither did I," Vivian admitted, his arm around her waist. "I came west looking for solitude and found a family instead. Are you disappointed?" she teased, turning to face him. "Only that I wasted so many years alone," he replied, drawing her closer. "Tamara, I know we've only known each other a short time, but I can't imagine my life without you and Eliza now. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Her answer was in her eyes before she spoke the word. "Yes." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church that had recently been built on the edge of their growing community. Sheriff Mills stood as Vivian's best man, while Eliza proudly carried flowers for her mother. As they exchanged vows, Vivian thought of the crumpled auction notice that had led him to this moment, a piece of paper that had intended to treat Tamara and Eliza as property to be sold, but had instead brought them together as a family bound by choice and love rather than ownership. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Vivian kissed his bride to the cheers of their neighbors and friends. Eliza threw her small arms around both of them, her face alight with joy. "Are we really a family now?" she asked, looking up at Vivian with trust in her eyes. "We really are," he assured her, lifting her into his arms, "and nothing will ever change that." In the years that followed, their family grew. Tamara gave birth to a son the following summer, a strong boy they named after Vivian's fallen brother. 2 years later, twin girls joined the family, completing their happiness. The community around them prospered as well, becoming known throughout the territory as a place where all were welcome regardless of background or past circumstances. Vivian eventually served as the settlement's first mayor, while Tamara established a school where she taught not only the children, but also adults who had been denied education in their earlier lives. On their 10th anniversary, as they watched their children playing in the yard of the large home that had replaced the original small ranch house, Tamara turned to her husband with tears of happiness in her eyes. "Do you ever think about that day you saw the auction notice?" she asked. "How different our lives might have been if you'd simply looked away." Vivian pulled her close, kissing her forehead gently. "Some choices define us, shape everything that follows. That was mine, and I would make it again 1,000 times over." "As would I," Tamara whispered, resting her head against his chest. "As would I."